I'm not going to cry a fucking river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. I don't give a fuck. They're terrible people. It's not even a question. It's crazy that people don't see it that way. They're not able to kill as many people as Israel because they don't have as many bombs and as many weapons. But if they did, they'd be doing the same thing. These people are not your allies. They are not the same as us. They come from an inferior culture that is horrible. It kills people for their identity, and it is directly antithetical to everything Western values stand for, and it is an inferior culture in all ways.
Okay, so Asmongold recently stirred up a controversy by commenting on Israel-Palestine for some godforsaken reason. If you don't know who he is, he's basically a general cultural commentator on YouTube and Twitch who talks about video games or YouTube or gay people or whatever he feels like.
I think the idea that, like, oh, well, you know, a gay couple is going to get a kid and then, like, molest the kid. Like, does this happen? For fucking sure it happens. Absolutely it happens.
He's not the most overtly politically engaged person on earth. At least not in a Ben Shapiro sort of way, but more in a Sydney Watson sort of way, where she covers culture war shit, sort of adjacent to politics. Although Asmongold sometimes does touch politics specifically, but not really in depth. In both categories, though, he's more of a moderate, what some people would call a centrist, who doesn't actively take a side in the culture war of politics. And I know people kind of roll their eyes when they hear this, and this may sound shocking given the viral clip of him talking about Palestinians saying,
"They come from an inferior culture."
But trust me, we'll get there. In this video, I'll be discussing the original clip, his subsequent debate with Hassan Piker, his apology video, and the fallout of the whole thing and what I think of it. Okay, so the original clip of Asmongold talking about Israel-Palestine is damn near objectively rhetorically terrible. Even if you do genuinely believe that Palestinians are
terrible people,
and that their culture is terrible and worse than America's, you'd think it would seem apparent that literally saying that is playing politics poorly, and that comments like that will make you out to be an extremist, which given the topic, was already pretty easy to do. This is especially important for someone who doesn't consider himself to be a partisan figure, because polarized beliefs such as this will paint you as such. In this case, a conservative, even if he wasn't siding with Israel in the original clip, so I don't know how he didn't catch that.
They're not able to kill as many people as Israel because they don't have as many bombs and as many weapons. But if they did, they'd be doing the same thing.
Inevitably, he caught a lot of flack for this online by a lot of leftists, received a 14-day suspension on Twitch, and as a result, he himself stepped down from his leadership positions in his esport companies. As far as punishments go, the backlash was going to happen regardless. The Twitch suspension was also inevitable, and not just because it's like a left-leaning platform. And Asmongold stepping down from his companies probably wasn't necessary, but as you'll see later, he chose to do it for various reasons. So I think all the shit he got was pretty fair considering what he said, but expecting him to be banned off Twitch, it's kind of unrealistic given how popular he is. Not saying he should have been banned, but look, I'm kind of mixed on the whole thing just because I'm generally against deplatforming. Like at the end of the day, he stated his opinions and wasn't actively calling for violence, or trying to rouse his viewers into doing so. Although if he was banned, I would understand. Like that wouldn't shock me. But overall, I'm kind of mixed on the whole thing. Hassan Piker gave his thoughts on the whole thing, which were basically what you'd expect.
What is this is the full clip?
I want to consider a genocide as a systematic killing of a group of people. They have genocide built into Sharia law.
Bro, it's so funny because like his analysis right here is the liberal analysis. When you scratch the surface of like the average American over a certain age and why they are so blind to the obvious dynamic, the obvious inequalities, the obvious inhumanity of Israel's operations, they literally agree with this. They also think this. Asmongold, your co-owner of your organization, you are calling a person from an inferior culture. What are you doing? Bro, this is straight up one-to-one what Nazis said about Jewish people, what like the most right-wing approach to this conversation.
But the more interesting part is when Asmongold asked to come on, and they talked about his comments on Israel-Palestine, which I'll be getting into next. Okay, so where do I start with this shit? First of all, this was one of the most painful 3.5 hours of my entire life, listening to these two bozos argue over the same shit over and over again. was fucking painful, and made making this video way more draining than it had to be. I wouldn't recommend watching it, so I'll try to keep this brief. Make a long video short, Asmongold in his original statement on Palestinian inferiority was referring to how Palestinians treat gay people as a result of their religion-embedded culture, which Asmongold has a history of resenting religion in general.
So basically, the reason why I don't like what they do is because it's based off of a religious theocracy. And so you can look at other religious theocracies in other countries that aren't being bombed, and the one commonality that they have is that they all suppress people's identity and they express their freedom of expression. And I think that any culture and any type of government that is derivative of a religion is fundamentally inferior. And I find it to be very problematic that we're using these books as a guideline for like how to make laws when these books actively encourage killing people for different types of identities. And obviously, like, I understand that there's like a huge spectrum of people that are part of any culture. There's people that are way more progressive, people that are way less progressive. I see countries that have laws that haven't been bombed, right? You look at like Saudi Arabia or like Dubai. A lot of these other countries still have the same types of expressions or same type of restrictions on the expression for LGBT.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that to be problematic and inferior. And I don't really understand how that's defensible at all. I don't like, and that's what doesn't make sense to me. Is
It's
that
not.
and like okay,
It's
well go
not.
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
But
Hasan has multiple responses to this. One, there's gay Palestinians in Palestine who are for gay rights, so passing negative judgment on the entire culture is unfair. Two, gay rights in Palestine aren't able to advance because of its feud with Israel, which stalls progress in Palestine because everyone's focused on just fighting and surviving. 3. Palestine isn't actually that anti-LGBT. And 4. America's to blame for every last instance of anti-LGBT discrimination in anti-LGBT countries in the Middle East due to American intervention.
Don't you feel like it's a bit unfair for you to attribute every instance of bigotry and bad behavior to being the West's fault?
no, I think I have a very
are-
realistic. I have a very realistic and materialist analysis of these sorts of things, where I think that people don't have time to fight for gay liberation when, like I said, they're too busy trying to literally rebuild their homes after it's bombed.
There's a big problem I have with Hasan in general. Like, he comes so close to making decent points, but he just cannot stop himself from being an overly partisan ideologue who follows up those decent points with, "This is why I don't care about what Hamas terrorists do to Jewish civilians."
Any time that a culture is killing people for their identity, that culture is evil,
Okay.
and they are committing an act of evil. It's completely indefensible.
You compare, for example, what the American government did in World War II. We support the Allied forces. We root for easy company, as my friend Felix Biederman always says, regardless of how America was segregated at the time, an incredibly unfair and inhumane practice, right? Americans were not exactly woke on gay people at the time. Americans were not exactly woke on black people at the time. But ultimately, right, we still celebrate the Allied forces and their accomplishments in World War II. Right, in defeating Adolf Hitler. In terms of people resisting against like Israeli occupation, a similar dynamic exists. These are guys who I don't agree with in terms of their own domestic affairs, in terms of the way that they govern themselves. But the problem is, they don't have, like, there is no opportunity for normal Palestinian civilians to go out and take it to the streets and like fight back against their own governments to be able to get to that point in terms of civil liberties for queer people. They've never had that opportunity. So I see it in the same exact way. Like, I ride for easy company, and I think that I am not going to sit here and criticize people resisting against the Israeli apartheid. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if fucking rapes happen on October 7th. Like, that doesn't change the dynamic for me even this much for that same exact reason, because it's a far greater evil than anything that people could potentially do. Genocide is the thing. It's the worst possible thing you can do to an entire population. And the reason why I don't spend a lot of time and emphasis on that is because their primary role, and their primary role for existence in general, they have become the only party that is ready to resist against the Israeli settler colonial occupation. And I'm not going to fault and find ways in which, like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the disagreements that I have with either their tactics. Doesn't matter if fucking rapes happen on October 7th, or even the way that they would potentially govern themselves. Because I think it bears no basis in the grander scheme of things.
I do criticize the tactics, especially like, I mean, that was the October 7th thing. I mean, a lot of random civilians and people that weren't involved were getting killed. It's evil when they do it, and it's evil when Israel does it.
Yeah. But again, but when all is said and done, you don't think about the practice of putting a fucking tire around collaborators in apartheid South Africa and lighting them on fire. You think about how gross and inhumane the practice of the maintenance of the apartheid was. Because if you spent a whole lot of time on what the tactics of the liberation were, it would almost come across as a justification, right? And that's my point.
His all-or-nothing mindset just completely destroys his credibility with me, because I know that he doesn't really care about what happens to Israeli citizens. All he cares about is winning, and therefore, in his eyes, nothing Hamas does will ever be horrible enough to justify not supporting them, and instead just supporting regular Palestinian citizens. That's not to say that Asmongold had a good showing, because he didn't, because rhetorically, Hasan just completely annihilated him because Asmongold lacks a certain awareness of how important rhetoric is in politics, and he doesn't seem to have a very good understanding of the Israeli-Palestine conflict as a whole. The thing is, Asmongold doesn't even attempt to distinguish between Palestinian civilians and Hamas. Like, do you think your average Palestinian is trying to hunt down gay people? Like, there's a difference between possibly looking down on gays or actively trying to kill them. By not making this distinction between civilians and extremists, Asmongold is blaming regular Palestinian citizens for the actions of religious fundamentalist terrorists ruling over them. And what all this serves to do is drive people away from defending regular citizens who just want to live.
I guess my argument is like, I don't care if, like, for example, Jewish people in the Holocaust, like if they were homophobic, for example, like I don't think that would justify the Holocaust. What your statements about Palestinian culture and the reason why a lot of people on Twitter are mad at you now is a similar sentiment being expressed, whether it was inadvertent or not, that their inferior culture is being wiped out, and you don't care if an inferior culture is being wiped out. Like that's the...
I'm not going to support a culture that demonizes and kills people for their identity. I'm never going to support a culture that does that. It doesn't matter whether it's Christian, Islamic, or anything, atheist. Any time that a culture is killing people for their identity, that culture is evil, and they are committing an act of evil. It's completely indefensible.
Dude, Asmon is not cut out for talking about politics, especially compared to Hasan, who's like a master of rhetoric. And one way Hasan utilized rhetoric was by subtly linking together Palestinians and gay people to make Palestine look more progressive than they actually are, and make America and Israel look less sympathetic and less progressive in kind of a misleading way.
Especially by a force that, you know, doesn't have like automatic heat-seeking missiles that avoid gay people. You know what I mean? They're killing gay people and trans people in Gaza every fucking day. But a lot of people who defend Israel try to repackage Israel's violence and contextualize it and make it seem more appropriate to an American audience that is sometimes pro-gay and pro-queer.
Basically, Asmongold made Hasan Piker look like a heroic Harvard scholar and only gave credibility to the side of the pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism faction, or the pro-Palestinian side, which Hasan represents.
I'm simply mentioning the rhetoric that is utilized in this process. Like one of the examples is like the indigenous population, right? Which is
like Native Americans.
Yes, which is ironic that we're having this conversation today. A lot of the early justifications of settler colonial violence was met with, well, the natives are barbaric. The indigenous population is killing one another. They're practicing bloodletting. They're cannibals and whatnot, some of which was not true at all, and others that might have been true. Now,
well, there's a lot of it that was true. I mean, they did some crazy shit down there.
So ultimately, it still does not justify the inhumane and horrific practice of full-scale genocide, which is infinitely more barbaric than anything that you could basically say about the indigenous population, right?
I would say to an extent, yeah. Like if you want
Okay, so before he released the apology video, he sent out a tweet and a Reddit post apologizing for his original statements on Palestinians. You know, there's kind of a stigma about public apologies, from top to bottom throughout society, whether it be mainstream celebrities or YouTubers, and that people only ever make them to save face, not because they've actually changed. And also on a more meta level, where your fans see it as you admitting defeat, and your enemies dunk on you because they also see it that way. I think those ideas hold merit, but at a certain point, this amount of polarized cynicism just isn't good for society. Believing that someone you like shouldn't admit to their wrongdoings because it makes them seem weak, and you personally believe they're correct anyway, or that people you don't like should apologize because you want them to seem weak, and you personally believe they're wrong, creates a lack of accountability, worsens tribalism, and discourages personal growth. Unless something comes out that shows otherwise, I think it's generally better for society that we take his word for it, and at least consider that he specifically points out what he said and that it was stupid, which is healthier than just assuming the worst. But anyway, finally he put out the apology video, and I thought it was good. He talked about his comments, of course, the backlash he got, and how he's changed and still wants to continue changing as a result. But more interestingly, he talked about his own character, and how his self-identified devolved character led to those comments.
This is what's so crazy about it, is that I think this has been going on now for like 2 years. I think that I've been slowly devolving into the most mean-spirited, I don't really even know what the word is for it. Just like the most mean-spirited, rude, like nasty, like just callous, psychopathic version of myself. I think that I've been devolving into this. And a lot of my friends have told me this. My dad has told me this. He said, you've got to chill out. You've got to calm down. I've been like, oh, that old man doesn't know what he's talking about. And I've finally had some level of accountability for that. And thank God. And it's something that when you get lost in the sauce and you get fixated around like listening and reading feedback and, you know, just getting hyper fixated, this is like your entire life, you lose a perspective on reality and you lose a perspective on the world. You know, I guess like I've always been kind of like an atheist, and even as a young kid I was raised Roman Catholic and I was always very defiant towards it. And I've always had a negative opinion of religion, and I've also had a negative opinion of religious cultures. And I think that that opinion is definitely shaped by the media that I've created, and the media I've created for myself, and then also just the media that exists, the media that I've chose to seek out as well. And I think that media has allowed me to have certain predispositions and certain biases that the truth is that don't have any sort of relation to what my own real life has been experienced. Or my own real life experience has been, so the main thing is that for the past, like, I would say like 10 years or so, if you look at my life like this, I would have said 10 years ago or maybe 8 years ago, streaming was like this, right? YouTube was like this. And now I would say that my life and streaming are basically the exact same size. And what I mean by that is that streaming is my entire life. Doing this is my entire existence. And I think that the process of that has been extremely unhealthy for me. And I think that what it's done is that it's allowed me to become such a one-dimensional person that I'm not even a person anymore. It's like I'm in Dark Souls, I'm going hollow or something. And I think about like all of the, you know, like I made a list of all of the things that I'm not doing in my life that I should be doing. And I was writing it down and I'm like, you know, fucking like, I'm just going and going and going. I'm like, oh my God, I think it'd be shorter if I transcribed the Bible. Like, this is insane. Like, like, whenever I have everything written down line for line, it's like, oh my God, I'm ruining my life.
It's kind of funny. What he said here reminded me of something Hasan said back in the debate video when he was reacting to Asmongold's original comments.
Palestinian culture as a whole, dude, This is your brain on Reddit. This is your brain on Reddit. If you don't interact with normal people, if you don't talk to people on a daily basis, and the only way that you're getting information from, your only outlet to the outside world is just simply Reddit, you arrive at this conclusion. It's like literally a vector of radicalization against Muslims, Islamophobia, and also specifically Palestinians. That's crazy.
Now, what Hasan was getting at here in his own muddled way was people's tendency to stay in echo chambers. They lead us down the route of tribalism, polarization, and dehumanizing your opposition, into believing they're inferior to such an extent that you either don't care when something bad happens to them, or you actively hope something bad happens to them, like these two clowns. Just a quick side note before I wrap things up. In the wake of Asmongold's Twitch suspension, many of his fans, right-leaning people and left-leaning people, have been calling out the hypocrisy of getting suspended for attacking Palestinians, but not Jews, like some far-lefters are accused of doing. This has led to people questioning if Twitch as a whole is an anti-Semitic platform, and has started a movement to get anti-Semitic far-lefters banned from Twitch, which has been successful to an extent, and has led to Twitch advertisers pulling out and Twitch bans happening left and right, with many people's final target being, of course, Hasan Piker, whose #1 fan is apparently the CEO of Twitch, Dan Clancy.
Twitch's new CEO defends job cuts and plans to meet with creators. Apparently, in this article, he also says this, which I thought was interesting. Not a gamer himself, Clancy mostly watches musicians or talk shows on Twitch. He particularly enjoys leftist political commentator Hasan Piker, who has 2.5 million followers on the platform. I like the frankness and the bluntness, Clancy said. He's comfortable saying what he believes. This has not been a good week for me.
Happy birthday to you.
What the fuck?
Happy birthday to you.
Bro, we're never beating the Hasan runs Twitch allegations after this. This is crazy. Oh my God. See, I told you, he's got banning powers.
Happy birthday, dear Hasan.
This is crazy.
Make of that what you will. I guess what goes around comes around, unless you're Hasan Piker. That's all I have for today. If you liked the video, leave a like. Watching those two debate was fucking brutal, and a like would make me feel better. But until next time, touch grass.